Sure. Thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to try to get used to doing these Zooms, little short spurts here, because I was running into some major issues with my internet being shoddy and coming in and out because I'm kind of rural, and timing, and also getting people to show up with me. So bear with me. We'll have some larger productions when I have someone helping me or when I have someone to interact with on Zoom. But today, this is what we're going to be discussing right now for this session. So I want to talk about self-taught midwives, and I want to talk about the history of midwifery and when everything started to change and when everything left the power of moms and became the power of midwives, and midwives became medical. Okay, so I've been doing a whole lot of research and reading a whole lot of wonderful books. So this is the newest one I started. It's called Touching Bellies, Touching Lives. I'm sure you guys can see that. Unbelievable. It's about Mexican midwives. And as most of you know, that I was trained under traditional midwives. So I was trained under midwives that are Native American and are midwives that were in Africa, in Uganda specifically. And I have a different view of midwifery because of my training. Even the midwives that served in Uganda in the hospital were traditional midwives. And in that hospital environment in Uganda, the OBs actually play second fiddle to the midwives. The midwives have primary all the time. And when an OB comes in, he doesn't get to take over the birth. He doesn't get to rule over anything. She gives him or instructs them or leads them if she needs their help. So it's a whole different dynamic, and we'll get into that kind of conversation another time, and we'll start talking about some of my Uganda stories. Let me turn my phone off real quick. But today for this session, I want to talk about self-educated, self-taught, self-trained midwives. And I don't care what school you went to, whether you did go to a school or didn't go to a school. The reality is you are always self-taught. You always come into midwifery with an understanding or an idea of what you want to become or who you want to become as a midwife, how you want to treat women or how you see this. And you then educate yourself and absorb the things that fulfills your idea of what you were going to become. So before we start this class any further, I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to be with me for a minute. I want you to be present to what we're actually doing here and what we're actually discussing here, because that's important. So I want you to take a second, and I want you to notice where your feet are. I want to notice the pressure there is or isn't on the bottom of your feet. I want to notice, I want you to notice how your bum is sitting in your chair and where your pressure points are. Are you touching the table? Do you have a pen and paper in front of you? Do you feel prepared for this class? And I want you to start paying attention to all the little voices in your head and all the little stories that you have going on about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying, what I look like and what I don't look like. We all have stories about what we're getting as input. Our brain then dissects it and then decides whether we approve, disapprove, agree, disagree. And those narratives are constantly running. And so right now, I just want you to kind of be aware of those narratives. Just no need to pay attention to them. Just be aware that they're there. Okay? Because some of the things I'm going to be talking about today and in the future, it's going to be kind of a new concept. It's going to be kind of far-fetched for some of you. But I want you to just be open and there with me. And I want you to, if you have something to say to me, feel free to say it to me and feel free to message me. If you have support or if you have something you disagree with, again, I want you to feel free to approach me and feel free to communicate that. Okay? So most of you who have started some sort of midwifery education or birth helper, birth worker education, you know who Ina May Gaskin is. And most of you know the story of Ina May Gaskin. She was a hippie bus in the 70s, and they traveled across the country, and she caught all the babies and she did all the things. Most of you don't know that the reason she kind of altered a little bit and started reading medical textbooks and OBGYN textbooks, which I have a whole stack of them here. They only learn from Williams Obstetrics. So if you guys ever want to go buy Williams Obstetrics, that's highly recommended. I recommend the 15th edition and older. So basically the 1970s, 60s, 50s, 40s. I don't recommend the newer stuff because that's when the insurance companies took over the writing of them, and the vernacular changed quite a bit, and it starts reading as a training manual for insurance companies. Okay, so let me back up here. So Ina May Gaskin was phenomenal. She was amazing. She is one of our matriarchs. She is one of the most recognized midwives in America. The problem that I'm having with that kind of scenario is we're denying the heritage midwives. We're denying publication, or how is it denying? That's not really the right word I want to say. There's a whole lot of shadowing over, clouding over, not paying attention to, not publicizing, not talking about the midwives that came before Ina May Gaskin. Ina May Gaskin didn't just have this idea in her head that this is just the way it is, and she just somehow got this message and this enlightenment that was just for her. No, she had a background. She knew that there were midwives before her. And you can see that in some of her books and some of her writings. The majority of the midwives that came before her were Black midwives, Mexican midwives. They were Native American midwives. And the midwives, the line that I come from was the Hills midwives, or Appalachian midwives, because my family's from Kentucky, which would be the Appalachian Mountains. And then on the other side, my grandfather was from Spain, but originally that heritage came from Cuba. And again, midwives are primary there as well. So it's very, 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 very possible and very, very likely that I had midwives in my lineage from both my mother's side and my father's side. And that's one of the things that motivates me is what was midwifery before we became medical midwives, before we started reading the textbooks and obeying the textbooks first. What was midwifery then? What does it mean for us today? And how did that impact women today? So those are going to be discussions that we're going to have multiple times in multiple different avenues. Today, the part we're going to talk about is what their transfer rate was, what their morbidity rate was before we became highly medical. So this is Ina May Gaskin, and I think there was, let's see, she lists here how many others there was. So their cesarean rate from the farm from 1970 to 2010, okay, 1.7%. Now, the World Health Organization says that our rate of cesarean should be under 13%. Theirs was 1.7%, and they were taking anybody, especially in the early years in the 1970s. They kind of started getting more restrictive as they adopted the CPM and as they adopted the more medical mindset. And now it's just a different situation. It's a different, now they're more selective on who does come in and who doesn't come in. So I would love to see the risk evaluations compared to from the 1970s to 2010. Such as I know for a fact in the 1970s, they were bringing in, much higher VBACs, and they were bringing in those who had cholestasis of pregnancy, those who had diabetes, and those who had, because I remember reading the stories about how Ina May was helping them heal from those diseases so that they could birth at home. But that's not really discussed today. And even in their practice, it's not really as widely accepted as it is. Now they have more of a standard practice. And one of the ways I do that personally is I was actually one of their clients. I tried to be one of their clients. Oh, let's see, that child is now 20 years old. She'll be 21 in August. So 20 years ago, I tried to be a client of the farm. It was $3,600, and I just couldn't afford it. I just could not, 20 years ago, pay $3,600. And because I had no ability to pay and they did not accept insurance, I was just left without a provider. So, but let's get to their cesarean rates, and let's read through this together. And I want you guys to just have an open heart, an open mind, and start this process of what happened, what changed, okay? So they had, 2,844 were accepted into care. There were 17 sets of twins. Vaginal births for twins, 17 sets. Vaginal birth after cesareans, 123, or 96.8% successful VBAC rate. Brow presentation born vaginally, 5. Face presentation born vaginally born, 12. Preeclampsia, 11, which is 0.4%. And maternal morbidity is 0. Guys, my rates, I don't have that many sets of twins. I've caught 4 sets of twins, all born at home, all born vaginally, all fine. See, my VBAC rate, I need to get this down right, but I'm actually 60% of my clientele is VBAC. And I'm even doing VBACs after 5, 6, and 7, and 8 cesareans. And even those have a higher percentage of success. I've only had 2 brow presentations and 2 face presentations. All 4 were born vaginally at home. Preeclampsia, I've had, I really ward off preeclampsia way early. So by the time they went to actual birth, preeclampsia, I think that I had 2 that were still considered preeclamptic. 15 or 20 more than that we were able to reverse the symptoms with the brewer's diet. And my cesarean rate is higher than 1.7%. I'm actually hovering right about 3.2%. And I do feel bad about that. There's a few things that kind of go into my cesarean rate or my transfer rate, because if I've transported you and you have a vaginal birth, I'm consider myself not successful. So typically if I transport a woman, it ends up being a cesarean. So the vast majority of any transports I have been from women that had too many people at their birth. They were being watched. They had photographers and other people's children and their children, and they had all these draws on their attention, and their labor kept starting and stopping, and they basically got too tired. That's a big one. Also having family members that were nagging about how unsafe this was and upset and yelling at me or yelling at her or yelling at the husband. That's actually a huge transport rate. And I've had probably 7 transports that were for medically necessary reasons. So I've had 3 transport for pelvises that I really do think were fused and we couldn't get any motion out of. I had one that labored for 6 days solid, and it was only dilated to like a half. She wasn't even ripe all the way. I had another who labored for 3 days solid, and I love this woman too. This was our 2nd baby together, and we just could not birth this baby vaginally. I couldn't get any movement in her pelvis. I'm not sure what I would do if medicine wasn't available in her particular situation. I've had a couple more women, and we'll talk about each one of these things when we go through actual risk factors. I've had one lady transport. She wasn't even in labor yet. I transferred care because she had some bleeding, and it was pretty obvious to me that the bleeding was placental bleeding and not cervical bleeding. And when she got to the hospital, the doctors refused to do a cesarean. They absolutely refused to do a cesarean for her. And I did not want her induced. I didn't want anything to happen, because I felt like if she was already having placental problems and placental separation before the actual onset of labor, that the onset of labor would actually compound that and actually make it more risky. After about 5 hours, the father of the baby finally said, we want a cesarean. We trust our midwife. We know that she's just not trying to get out of this. We need to have this baby. And this was at OU in Oklahoma City. The doctor said over and over again, and it's kind of a crazy story, that there's no way to tell via ultrasound if there was bleeding from the placenta, which is incredibly not true, because we can actually tell, even early on, if we've got a partial placental separation in early pregnancy or threatened miscarriages. I don't know why they would say that. I don't know why they try to convince us of that. That particular mother was a doctor in her own right. She's actually a chiropractor. So that was very disheartening for her, because she really, really trusted her body, and she had really done all the work necessary to have a home birth, a vaginal birth, and it just did not work out. And I consider that one to be incredibly medically necessary. So there are situations where the hospital is absolutely needed. And I feel like that the way our nutrition is changing, our stress levels are changing, their environment is changing, the amount of toxins that we're consuming is changing. I do expect that that number of 1.7 should probably be higher in this current environment. And that's including things like vaccinations and 5G, whether that has an impact or not. That is remains to be seen. But what we do know is that things are different than they used to be. We are seeing different things that happen at home even without interference. And it's something we need to pay attention to and we need to address regularly here. But I don't think that the national average, I think, is like 33%, 32% right now. That's way too high. I think that a larger percentage of women can actually birth vaginally than that. And I think that we should be shooting for the under 5%, even though the World Health Organization says 13% is a really good number. Okay, so having said that, this little class, I want you to, at the end of this class, and what you'll be responsible for learning today, is I want you to find, and I will post a link if I can find a story. There is a video, let's see if I can play it one day, about an Alabama midwife, and it's called All of My Babies. And I found it online one time, and I need to see if I can find it again, but you need to watch the movie All of My Babies. In there, she talks about how midwifery was taken away from the Black midwives that were doing so well, and how they were made to feel when the doctors and the classes that they had to take were teaching them basic things like how to wash their hands, and blaming the morbidity rate on mothers and the neonatal and maternal morbidity rate on midwives not washing their hands. I do believe these midwives were washing their hands before the doctors got to them. I just think that the environment that they were in, the poor conditions, the living situations that they were in had a larger impact on them. And they never did include what their morbidity rate was. That bothers me. How they will gladly announce, how many babies are lost by midwives and how many mommies are lost by midwives, but they don't actually talk about how many babies are lost in the hospital and how many mommies are lost in the hospital. And that's a problem. That's an integrity issue in my world. The understanding that birth is as safe as life gets. There's never going to be a midwife who goes completely through her entire career and doesn't see some sort of catastrophe. And we do everything we can to avoid that, but we don't hold life in our hands. I cannot issue life because I want the baby or the mother to live. Things will happen, and that's why we get this education. That's why we learn what's normal and we learn what's available. And that's why there's preceptorships, and that's why there's time spent in the field before you go out on your own. So that somebody that has been through some of the hardships and seen some of the extreme cases can identify them and help you to identify them. Okay, so guys, thank you so much. Thank you for being here with me this moment in this class. Thank you for being open to what I have to say. And I'm going to, after I share this, I'm going to post a couple of links that will be your responsibility to make sure you watch and or read as part of today's lesson. Okay. I'll talk to you guys later. Hold on a minute. This tech driving me crazy. Bye, guys.